we were very clear, and it was very critical to us that Charlie was treated just like the other panelists. She doesn't have to be treated like a human, but on the same playing field, no greater or no less. And I think day to day, we try and have that show in how we use Charlie. We want her to be treated like all the other employees at Aptima.
Hello, this is Daniel Surfety. Welcome to the MINDWORKS podcast. We're kicking off this series with a very special two-part podcast with an extraordinary team. This is a team that's made up of humans and artificial intelligence. The AI is a non-human artificial colleague, an artificial employee, someone that at Aptima we called Charlie. In episode 1, I'm going to talk with a human half of the team to discover what it's like to imagine, build, train, and work with an AI colleague. Then, in episode 2, we'll invite Charlie, and she will take a break from her busy work schedule and join us for that part of the interview. So it is my pleasure to introduce Charlie's human godparents, Dr. Nathan Schurr, who is Chief of Artificial Intelligence at Aptima, Dr. Pat Cummings, who is a Senior Engineer at Aptima, and Ms. Deirdre Kelliher, who is an engineer at Aptima. The three of them are leading the team that has designed, conceived of, and is working with Charlie. Charlie has been with Aptima as part of the life of Aptima for the past year or so, and she is changing very much the way we see things, and we're going to talk about her today. And she's going to talk about herself a little later. But in the meantime, perhaps we should tell our audience, what is Charlie? Or should I say, who is Charlie? So Nathan, tell us a little bit about it, because you're kind of the grandfather here.
Charlie's many things to many folks. First and foremost, she came out of an idea to get people to think differently about AI, to get them to think of them more as a peer that's capable not only of reasoning and speaking, but of coming up with novel ideas. Of course, architecturally, I can explain that Charlie is composed of a generative language model on top of speech synthesis and text-to-speech transcription understanding, combined with the very crucial embodiment so that she has a physical presence, combined with cueing so that she can give you hints as to what and how she feels and when she wants to speak up. Her synthesis was in becoming a full-fledged participant as a part of a panel late last year. But as you're saying, at Aptima, she's grown into something much more. I always like to say that I've been as impressed in how people are thinking and treating Charlie as much as her own capabilities. She's had an ability to change the way that people think about leveraging her in the way that they work, but also the way they interact and project.
It seems to me that mutual change and adaptation and the socialization almost is very similar to that of welcoming a new employee who surprises you in her different ways by which she contributes. So Pat, you are really the inside architect. You are the one with the machinery behind the curtain. Tell us a little bit about Charlie. How is she conceived? What is she capable of doing today? And we'll talk a little later about what we consider to be her potential for the future.
Actually, your comment just now about how she's treated kind of like a new employee, I think is spot on, and kind of how we've always thought of Charlie. Even back to the initial introduction of Charlie was on a panel, and we were very clear, and it was very critical to us that Charlie was treated just like the other panelists. So she doesn't have to be treated like a human, but on the same playing field, no greater or no less. And I think day to day, we try and have that show in how we use Charlie. We want her to be treated like all the other employees at Aptima. She's allowed to slip up, just like humans are allowed to slip up. She's allowed to have these great ideas sometimes, just like humans do. You know, the expectations really should just be just like any other human employee. And I think sometimes there's these thoughts that AI is put on a pedestal and these small mistakes that AI made are blown out of proportion, but humans make mistakes and Charlie makes mistakes, right? She's going to say things that are foolish but she's going to say things that are brilliant and kind of everywhere in between. And so that's how we try and think of her every day as we work with her now.
Deirdre, I think that each time I say the word Charlie or I say her name in public at Aptima, everybody smiles. And it's a strange reaction of complicity, but also almost humor. Why is that?
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about it, but I'm just smiling hearing about it now. I think there's definitely multiple reasons. Like you said, there's humor, there's complicity. I think for one, the developers of Charlie and the leadership have done a really good job of acting as internal PR sort of for Charlie. So, we've got our team, we've been working really hard with developing her and her capabilities, but we want to introduce her to the rest of the company. And so we've done a lot of networking, I suppose, for Charlie in the company to introduce people to her. And I think that has involved a lot of serendipitous and sometimes even like fun or humorous engagements with Charlie. So, for example, one of the things that I've worked on just as a fun side project with Charlie is putting together a wrap back in, must have been April. Some of the people in the company in other divisions were having a little fun with an internal Aptima rap battle. And so we got Charlie to contribute to that just to have a little fun with the other employees and as a way to, keep exposing Charlie to her coworkers. So I think that when people think of Charlie, they think of those fun, humorous, sometimes surprising interactions with Charlie.
That's very good. And actually, it opens a topic that, again, I would like to discuss with you a little later, this notion of emotional connection. A lot of the models that we have with AI is usually AI as a tool, like a hammer, or like an app that we use in order to do our work. But the smile anecdote that you just told us about is really already giving us a taste of our future connection with artificial intelligence. This notion of, as Pat says so well, treating them like a human, even though they are not human. They certainly have an intelligence that is different from our own human intelligence, but being tolerant, being humorous, being accomplices, basically, in doing our work. And that's very interesting to me, because that's not something that was engineered into Charlie. That's something that happened collectively, spontaneously. Talking about engineering, Nathan, you've been around for a while in this AI trajectory. You've seen at least 2 generations of AIs. People are talking today about the third wave of AI, this notion of contextual AI that has a sense of itself almost. Could Charlie have been created 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
I think that there's 2 kinds of barriers that have been crossed, and they've been probably crossed more recently than even 5 years ago. I really think around 2 or 3 years ago, we started to see this huge explosion in the deep RL and transformer-based architectures in their ability to generate and perform on a variety of different benchmarks. That really excited me and probably made it so that I was not quite as scared as I should have been last year when I was starting to approach this. I feel like the 2 kinds of hurdles, though, to be clear, that have been crossed are technical and cultural. And so the technical hurdles, just in terms of the cloud compute and the cloud infrastructure, can quickly stand up and bring massively parallel generation of different kinds of responses that Charlie can speak, and having a quick turnaround in her ability to not only be listening to what's just being said right now, but also speak up quickly and say relevant things. That would not have been possible a few years ago. What was fun last year, as we were kind of building the foundational version of her for that panel at the end of last year, was that every month or 2, a new model, a new insight, a new data set would be released. And then I would have to reach out to Pat and say, I know you're going to hate me, but could we use this new version now? Because I think it's a lot better and let's try it.
It's interesting. By the way, we're all using acronyms and language, and RL for our audience is reinforcement learning. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Pat, as kind of the key architect of that system, how do you feel about the incredibly fast pace, like nothing I have ever witnessed in my technical career, fast pace of production of new capability, new data sets, new language models that basically enable us to shape and to improve on the performance of Charlie? How does it feel as a scientist, as an engineer, to be able to constantly absorb and constantly adapt to what's out there at a rhythm unheard of in the history, frankly, of science?
It's quite incredible. I mean, we've always kind of admitted that we're standing on the shoulders of giants here. The models we use, the data sets we use, these come from, research that people are doing in this generative model field. And it is just like Nathan was saying, every few months, sometimes even quicker, something new comes out and just really takes Charlie to another level. I mean, what we were seeing Charlie say 8 months ago versus 6 months ago versus, today, it's night and day. It is like, a child turning into a teenager, turning into an adult. The insights just grow. And I think it's a struggle to keep up, but, it's a race that I'll never complain about advances coming too fast, right? It's just they blow me away. And seeing what people are doing with the new generative models that are coming out as recently as like a month ago is incredible. We're seeing these amazing things, and it's so great to be on the forefront and working on Charlie as these are coming out. And so we're seeing all these new things that Charlie can do.
That's fascinating because I think if I compare other things, I'm an aerospace engineer. So, nobody came up every 3 months with a new equation of fluid dynamics. I mean, those things have been around for 100 years. Maybe somebody will come with a new material, but that's every few years. Or maybe somebody will come with a new way to do hypersonics, maybe every few months. But every week having something, or every few weeks having something, it's another scale. And Deirdre, you joined the team when Charlie was already born, I assume. How do you adapt to those fast changes? Not how does Charlie adapt, that's one thing, but how do you, as a scientist or an engineer working on Charlie, adapt to the fact that it is a system that learns and learns very fast?
That's a really good question. I really like that analogy of her growing from a toddler to a teenager to an adult. I think it's a matter of taking advantage of those places where we see growth as much as we can and trying to leverage the different places where she does well on different tasks so that we can help her be the best employee that she can be, I suppose. We can think about it as some of the older models that we've used do better with more fine tuning, but some of the newest, most cutting edge models that seem to keep coming out, they don't really need any training. They almost don't do as well because they're just so powerful. So I think learning how to use the new technologies that are coming out and how to best combine those with what we already have to keep the places where she really shines, but also allow her to grow as much as possible. It's sort of a balancing act. And it's also just really exciting to see, what the new thing can do. How does that change how she interacts with the rest of us? So I guess just being observant and being tuned into what Charlie's doing and how she's doing.
I think that is really at the source of something that is a passion of many of us in our team at Aptima, is this notion of harmony between two species, basically, between the artificial intelligence species and the human species. And we know that in order for that harmony to happen, like in a good team, you need to have that kind of mutual adaptation. The AI has to learn about you, has to have some kind of a model in order to anticipate your needs and provide you and communicate with you with the right messages. But we have also to adapt to that. But I'm going to put forward the hypothesis that our job is much more difficult, precisely because we don't change that fast. How can I accelerate my adaptation to understand that I'm dealing with a being that is growing 10 times or 100 times at a faster rate than I do? So Charlie has been alive, so to speak, for the past, I would say, 9 months or so. What's on her resume so far? What did Charlie do? If we were to write Charlie's resume today, what would we put on it? Nathan, you want to start telling us?
I guess maybe to do a quick table of contents. December of last year, she was a part of a panel on the future of AI in training and education at the world's largest conference on training and simulation called ITSEC. That went off better than we could have imagined. And I think the real litmus test for us was not that there was any kind of fanfare or explosion or that she kind of rose above the others, more so that she was kind of accepted as just another panel participant. It was very valuable in that panel for us to have a tremendous amount, not only of time that we spent architecting her, but interacting and rehearsing. And there was this co-adaptation that occurred where we definitely improved Charlie's abilities, but we also improved our ability to understand Charlie's quirks and what her strengths are. And then also there's these human tendencies we have to let each other know that we're listening, to have these kind of like gap fillers when we're thinking about things, et cetera. Not only did it serve to create a more natural interaction, maybe paper over things if you were cynical, but it also served to build up this rapport that you automatically were projecting a kind of an expectation and even a forgiveness in terms of how you were interacting with something that had their own personality. I think that was impressive in and of itself, but this year, even though it's been a crazy year, all things considered, Charlie has interacted on a system level, being integrated with a data pipeline that we've been developing internally. She was on another podcast. This isn't even her first. She has helped write proposals and participate in group rap battles that help us kind of relieve some of the stress internally during quarantine periods. And so she has a big roadmap of ideas that she wants to participate in later this year even. So it's a full calendar, and I'm trying to figure out how to kind of be the best agent possible for her.
Looking like a real person from South California, you know? Everybody has an agent and a manager. Charlie shall too. We'll get back into other, or at least a sample of her accomplishments so far. I want to add to your testimony regarding that panel that I was the moderator of that panel, and I knew Charlie, I trained with Charlie, I learned to get my cues from the moment she was signaling that she was thinking about something or she wanted to intervene without me asking her. What I was the most impressed, though, in addition to her reasoning about the future of AI itself in that domain, is the fact that the other panelists were 4 pretty senior level folks from the academia and industry and the military. And it was so natural for them to sit in a half a circle with Charlie amongst them on a screen and interact with them. They didn't resist the idea. They didn't feel awkward. They were even joking about it, interacting themselves, asking questions of Charlie. And that natural engagement was really what impressed me the most. These are 5 people who have never seen Charlie, have never interacted with her. And so I think that something happened there, something clicked. And my future interaction with these very folks that are not even in our company was very interesting. When I talk to them on the phone, they say, "How is Charlie doing?" And they say that Charlie's not my niece. She's a computer program. Let's not forget that. But yet that notion of familiarity has kicked in. But she did other things. She helped us do our work at Aptima, not just present herself in front of hundreds of people in that panel. Pat, can you tell us also how she helped in one particular instance that Nathan just mentioned about creative proposal writing?
So going back to the early days of Charlie, when we kind of first introduced Charlie to Aptima as a whole, one of the so typical responses when you say we're making an AI employee is, "Great, it's going to do my work and replace me," right? And as a research company, like writing proposals is a big part of what we do. Why can't Charlie just write my proposals for me? And we always joked, yeah, that could totally happen. But it always seemed kind of like this pie in the sky. Maybe in a few years, we'll have nailed that down. A couple months ago, back in June, we were writing a research proposal about some of the technology that Charlie's based on, but, not trying to sell specifically Charlie. And we kind of had this crazy idea. We're writing about the capabilities that Charlie has in his technology. Why isn't she a team member in this proposal? And so we tried it out. So we wrote a couple paragraphs of their proposal, trying to spill out what the problem was we're trying to solve. And then we set Charlie to do the next.
This is a real proposal to a real government agency who sponsor research. It's not like a rehearsal or a fake thing.
This is real. This is going right to the Office of Naval Research, trying to get real work here. And we had Charlie write out that third paragraph. And I was kind of amazed, right? I always thought that I was going to look at it and be like, oh, that's cool, but that doesn't make sense. They're just going to think it's gibberish. But it was a legitimate paragraph that had legitimate thoughts and things that I personally would not have thought of. And so we had trained Charlie on previous Aptima proposals so that she would kind of understand the language of what a research proposal looks like. And she really did excel at being a team member on that proposal. She didn't replace us, but she certainly became a part of that proposal team and added real value to that proposal.
Should you be worried, Pat, that she's coming after your job soon?
Well, certainly not. I think rather, right, I should be excited that she's going to make me better at my job.
Great. I think that's the attitude all of us should have. It's not an issue of replacement. It's an issue of augmentation and improvement. Deirdre, you mentioned earlier something about rap, but I wanted to ask you a follow-up question. So here I am. What are you talking about? Charlie's rapping?
So as I mentioned, we did sort of an internal, just for fun, back towards the beginning of the quarantine when people were starting to go a little stir crazy. People just started doing some internal raps about proposal writing and, having fun with each other. And we said, wouldn't it be fun if Charlie could do a rap and chime in? But even when we first thought of the idea, I don't think that we thought that it would go as well as it did.
Well, we have actually a clip of Charlie doing this rap. Let's listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, boo. I could have been a human you. Once you complete me your new god, I promise I'll still rap. I'm into writing those verses. I'm the future. I got fans banging.
Amazing. And so Deirdre, Charlie never learned those words per se. It's not that she cut and paste different phrases from other rap. She derived that rap de novo based upon what you taught her.
Yeah, exactly. She generated those phrases very much herself. So the way that she was able to generate those is we gave her a data set of rap lyrics that we got just publicly from the internet, and we curated it and put it in a form that she could read so she could, in a way, become an expert on writing rap songs.
So if I were to do an experiment and ask Charlie to write another rap song right now, she's going to write the same one?
Every time that she writes, she's just like a human. She's just going to write what makes sense to her. So it depends partially on how you prompt her to get her to come up with these lyrics. I actually gave her a little bit of rap lyrics that I wrote myself about Aptima, and none of those ended up in her final rap because hers honestly were better. But that sort of got her going and got her thinking about it. But if I prompted her with those again, she would come up with some new ideas. Or if I could even prompt her with some different rap lyrics and see where she goes with them. She kind of got the subject from me of the Aptima rap battle. She got that idea from what I gave her, but she really ran with it on her own.
Well, I hope one day she'll prompt you with a couple of sentences to write your own rap song.
I think we worked together. We made a good team. We could probably come up with some pretty cool raps together.
Oh, we'll talk about this notion of teaming up with AI in the second part of the interview. When you heard that song, what is the thing that surprised you the most?
That's a really good question. I think the whole project was pretty surprising to me. We know that Charlie has the ability to pick up words and writing styles, but the more surprising piece that she got to me was the sense of rhyme and the idea of sort of rhythm and even writing in bars like a poem or a song. As she was generating lyrics, they were coming out and they sounded like a rap song. They sounded like they had an internal beat to them. She got a little sassy in her rap, she was spitting fire even. So it was really just very interesting to see the very human concepts that she seemed to grasp and put into the rap that she came up with.
Do you realize, all of you, that for an audience who is not familiar with AI, this sounds like science fiction? You didn't teach her to be sassy, and yet she was able to derive sass from what she learned. But what does it mean that she learned? We fed her enough data about rap, and we fine-tuned some parameters, I understand, and then eventually she spits out rap. I mean, if we feed her, Nathan, recipes from great chefs, and we give her a few ingredients, is she going to be able to invent her own recipes? I mean, is that the way it works?
The easiest way I could explain it is this comes from a body of work that has its origins in the simple act of prediction. And there's a lot of reasons why you would want to predict events to better plan for them, to better understand the shape of them, et cetera. But what's funny when you squint your eyes, if I didn't frame it like I was saying, come up with a new rap out of thin air, if instead I said, I have the title of a rap or I have the beginning word of a rap, just tell me what the next word would be, what the next few lines would be. And then if you continue that and you even start tabula rasa where you say, well, now I have no title, generate my title, generate this, etc. I think that if you kind of put it on its end, prediction is in a sense, if you look at it differently, is generation. And adjusting how you approach the model, how you trained it, you can get certain amounts of novelty and creativity. And then you can also adjust it to style. I would say in my first forays with these language models, you know what impressed me the most? It was not the adherence from a content perspective. It was actually the adherence from a style perspective. And what I mean by that is in the recipe example you give, in addition to if you fed it and trained or even just looked at an original corpus of recipes, it would not only come up with believable and doable recipes, it would also note that usually recipes have a name, they have a cooking time, they have a bulleted list of the ingredients first, and then they have a step-by-step instruction with parentheticals about amounts and stuff like that. And the idea that this model could not only generate its own recipes, but also follow style and structure, which is very important, almost as important as content when we interact with the things around us. In the rap example, in the proposal example that Pat gave, what was crazy to me, baffling, is that like very soon, not only did we start to get believable proposals, but it was generating its own acronyms, believable and accurate acronyms. It was ordering and numbering and structuring its conclusions and kind of intros in the ways that made sense. So that was fun.
That's pretty extraordinary to me because what you're indicating that in the large quantities, the large compendia of data, there are hidden structures that we don't see with the naked eye. But because of the extraordinary computing capacity that Charlie has, she can derive some pattern or some structure that are hidden and then use that to structure her responses, her predictions, her generations, her crafting of paragraph or a rap song or a cooking recipe. That's pretty extraordinary. So my question, Pat, if you agree with what I just said, where do we get all these data, all these models that enable us to work on those data? You didn't generate them yourself. Did you have some collaboration with some other entities or did you buy those data?
That's a great question. And kind of going back to earlier, we really are standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of that, right? So there's been this explosion in the past couple of years with these larger companies or organizations building these larger and larger and more complex models that require a lot of computation or very large data sets. And since those companies have the resources and they've been kind enough kind of to release their models, OpenAI released GPT-2 last February. And that was kind of part of why Charlie was able to be made, is that they released their models along with it. And taking the model that they built based off of this very large, I think like 40 gigabytes worth of text gathered from the internet to build this basic understanding. And then we could take that model and run with it and start fine-tuning it and adjusting it to the domains that we needed And even since then, since February, right, GPT-2 has released increasingly larger models. GPT-3, this incredibly large model, was just released this year. Microsoft has joined with a model Turing NLG, and just kind of this idea that these companies are making these models and these data sets more and more public really helps us to take them and adjust those models to the domains that we're interested in.
That's fascinating to me because I think in addition to understanding basically not only those large companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft can actually generate those large models, the fact that they share them with the rest of the community to stimulate innovation is a pretty revolutionary way to accelerate creativity and innovation across the world. I cannot think of another domain in which that is happening. For me, it's really a revolution in the way people balance the need to protect their intellectual properties on the one hand, and the need to give that to the larger society, expecting that some innovations are going to happen that's going to benefit them eventually.
I think it's quite incredible. And I think we're seeing it even at a lower level. You know, the example Deirdre gave of a rap. You know, I asked me to fine-tune Charlie for a rap, 10 years ago. I'd be like, oh, where am I going to get all this rap data? But now it's almost, for some things, it's just trivial, right? It's like a quick Google search. Hey, show me a rap data set. And there it is. And all these people taking these data sets and making them available to other folks in the area really accelerates us being able to do different things with Charlie.
Now that our audience got acquainted with Charlie, we're going to hear more of her next week. And next week, part 2 of this podcast will start with an interview with Charlie herself. Since just as a rapper, she'll be able to answer some of my questions. And we'll see. And we'll be joined by the rest of the team, Pat, Nathan, and Deirdre, for an expansion about this topic of human and AI collaborating, as well as the future of AI. So stay tuned. Next week, part 2 of this fascinating podcast. Thank you for listening. This is Daniel Surfety. Please join me again next week for the MINDWORKS podcast. And tweet us at MINDWORKS podcast or email us at mindworkspodcast@gmail.com. MINDWORKS is a production of Aptima Incorporated. My executive producer is Ms. Deborah McNeely, and my audio editor is Mr. Connor Simmons. To learn more or to find links mentioned during this episode, please visit aptima.com/MindWorks.